Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you might be around the world. Thank you for joining today's webinar, My Top 12 Worst Agile Anti-Patterns. My name is Eric Neighborg. I run marketing and operations here at Scrum.org, and I'm joined today by one of our professional Scrum trainers, Stefan Wolpers. Stefan's going to take you through the content. We've left lots of time for questions. So we'll take your questions and be able to answer those as well. If we just quickly go to the next slide, Stefan. Just your microphones are muted throughout. The recording will be available up on our website within 24 hours, along with the slides for this event. Please put your questions in the Q&A tab. You'll see the Q&A tab on the bottom of your screen. Just click that, and if you have any questions, throw them in there rather than the chat. This way we can record those questions and share them with Stefan after for any that we may not get to. Next slide. Just briefly, if you're new to Scrum.org, who are we? Scrum.org was founded by our chairman and co-creator of Scrum, Ken Schwaber. Ken continues to sit atop our organization, helping us drive our mission of helping people and teams to solve complex problems. Scrum.org provides three basic things: training. Stefan's one of our professional Scrum trainers delivering that consistent training around the world. Certification to validate that knowledge that you gain through training and through other ongoing learning resources like this webinar. With that, I will hand it over to Stefan to introduce himself and take you through today's content. Stefan, all yours.
Thank you, Eric. So, why are we here today? This is relatively simple. We've been very, very busy at Scrum.org because we just published 3 awesome books from the Professional Scrum series. It's about unlocking business agility with evidence-based management, facilitating professional Scrum teams, and of course, the Scrum Anti-Patterns Guide. That was my part in the whole exercise. And if you are interested in getting your hands on these excellent investments for your career, just consider the Scrum.org code and go to Inform IT. I'm sure Eric will provide everyone with the links and the code separately. So it's a very good value for the money. So just a bit advertising here. Please bear with me. Okay, so what's my background? I studied chemistry, and as so often in our industry, I didn't choose Scrum. Scrum chose me. So a long time ago, almost 20 years ago, some folks I was working with asked me whether I would be interested in becoming a Scrum Master. And I said, my goodness, how can this be, right? And it's never left me since then. And I spent a lot of time in the industry. I'm a Scrum Master, product owner for 5 years now as a trainer. And I still love it like on day number 1. And if you are familiar with my little cartoons, you probably know why. And actually, we will have a look at these and 12 of those cartoons over the course of the next 25-30 minutes. So let me introduce the idea behind the worst agile anti-patterns, because they're not completely and exclusively related to Scrum. They're about working in an agile manner in general. And what I've noticed over the years is agile cannot be pushed. You know, you can't order someone to be agile now. It needs to be pulled. And people need to want to be agile, and typically starts with including them, giving them a voice, helping them understand how becoming agile will personally benefit them. There's a whole variety of issues here, from having a better work-life experience, for example, becoming better at what you do, have a more meaningful job, long list of ideas that come to mind here. And all of those basically require 3 things when you boil them down. So the first principles of becoming agile, if you want, you need to somehow change your mindset. Agile does not work very well with people who say, yeah, well, I know exactly what to do and you just follow. Or I come at 9 a.m. and I leave at 5 p.m. You can tell me in between what I'm supposed to do, but after that, I'm gone. So a mindset is certainly a critical issue. You will need to change the culture. And if you consider Lauman's law, you know that the system needs to change first before the culture changes. So that's really a critical part, and descaling the organization is one way to actually contribute to the imminent systems change, because otherwise a lot of things will not really work in the big picture. And finally, you will need to empower the people closest to a problem to solve it. It does not mean that there's anarchy. Of course, you set up guardrails and constraints, and there will be governance rules, of course. But by all means, tell the people where they need to be and be surprised what they come up with. And if that sounds familiar to you, it actually should. It's almost 80 years old. And it outdates Scrum and Agile and the manifesto by decades, and was a quote from a famous US general from World War II. So what is this all about? Okay, let's have a look at my top 12 worst Agile anti-patterns, and there are no particular order here. I just thought this would be decent. Let's start with number 1, precise estimates. Technically, it's an oxymoron. An estimate cannot be precise because otherwise it wouldn't be an estimate. But there's much more to it than just this ludicrous idea that we, in a complex environment, when we are trying to accomplish things probably no one has ever done before, try to be precise about what the effort will be and what kind of problems you might run into. If you have ever refurbished your home, you will understand what kind of effort this is, and that a lot of things will not go as planned. And now imagine that you are creating a complex product, like we all do today. So this is a classic issue here. Now let me explain that the idea of that your stakeholders want to know how much is something and when can they have it is completely legitimate. They need to plan too. They also have to talk to other departments, for example, in the organization. They have to coordinate their work. I mean, if you plan a major release of your software and that requires upskilling the customer care folks, then you better have a good understanding when those upgrades will be available so that they can start the training in time. So basically wanting to know how much something is and when you can have it is a legitimate question. However, what we are not about to do here is basically create a level of understanding of what is in front of us to the point that we can say, okay, this is going to take 14 hours and 26 minutes. This is absolutely ludicrous and impossible to do for a simple reason. We probably do not know what we will uncover when we are working on it. These famous unknown unknowns that we might run into. Probably we all have a good understanding today of what might be ahead of us, and then we figure something out that we didn't even think about. This happens all the
Stefan,
time.
can I interrupt real quick? If you could just speak a little bit louder, a couple of people are having difficulty hearing you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So,
and folks, feel free to turn on your closed captioning if that's helpful as well.
So let me speak up a bit. Where were we? Estimates. So why are we considering estimates to be useful? It's not about that estimates deliver precise estimates of the work that is ahead of us. No, it's more kind of another element of risk mitigation. It's the final check before we start working on something that we are all on the same page. Do we share the same understanding what we are supposed to do here? Do we have a shared understanding how we are going to proceed about this? This is the purpose of estimates. It's a good opportunity to figure out that something that we need to talk about something before we actually start working on it. This is the purpose why we have it. And this is, I believe, still the reason why estimates are useful. Just ditch the numbers. The numbers are basically not that interesting. The communication, however, is very much interesting. And which brings us back to the original idea. What we do here is forecasting something at an aggregated level, which is complicated. So your stakeholders should never confuse a forecast with a precise estimate, air quotes, because those things will simply not go together. And depending on how the organization reacts to unprecise estimates, you probably will get even into a worse situation than before. It happens all the time. So people will start playing safe, just to ensure that they will meet the forecasted delivery date by all means. And typically this results in delivering less over time. This is actually what we're not, we don't want that. We want to optimize, of course, the value of the work we create, and that takes time. And if you have these restraining factors like insisting on accurate estimates, you probably make the job much harder than it should be. Okay. Dogmatism. In a complex environment, dogmatism does not help. We live on this idea of inspect and adapt, build, measure, learn. Try something out that looks reasonable when you start doing it, and then figure out what is happening. And based on what you figure out, you adjust your next step. This is the whole purpose of empiricism that we practice here. So combining it with dogmatism one way or another is really not helpful. This, for example, also applies to the Scrum Guide. Some people take it literally, and I don't think that's a good idea. It's a framework, intentionally incomplete. So you, by all means, you have to augment it to make it work and adapt it to the context of your organization, of your work, of the problem you try to solve. Being dogmatic about it does not help. Actually, I find it highly counterproductive, and it silences a lot of good conversations, and it's the club that kills every form of collaboration and learning, etc. So dogmatism is really, really not helpful, by all means, and that starts with the Scrum Guide. It's a very valuable document, but please do not print it on posters and post it to the wall. It does not help. The oversized product backlog. Yeah. So from a product owner's perspective, the fact that is most important to them is the product backlog. Our product backlog reflects at any given moment in time the best use of the capacity of our team from a perspective of creating value for customers and our organization. So it's by all means a dynamic, constantly changing artifact. Now, there is this, in some organizations, this habit that they believe when they are busy and they reflect their busyness in a large product backlog, that this will somehow improve their professional standing within the organization. It is, don't worry, we got you covered. The problem is that the moment your backlog starts to grow, and it quickly starts to become uncomfortable in the sense that you start crowding out collaboration. I don't know about you, but I can oversee maybe 100 entries in the product backlog, maybe 125, but beyond that, I have to start looking at these items in the product backlog. Now, if you add too many items to your product backlog, people will lose the interest in actually working with it. And they will be less eager to help the product owner with that. And probably you will also find that the quality of product backlog items will start to decay But there will be a lot of product backlog items that basically are none, because it's maybe some kind of reminder. Okay, don't forget X, and your stakeholder B ask for Y. So maybe you even start putting ideas into the product backlog. This is not the purpose of the product backlog. Put those somewhere else, but focus the product backlog really on what you're planning to do for the next 2, 3, 4 sprints that will allow you to accomplish your product goal that you're currently working on. And my suggestion always is keep it actionable, and actionable typically means short and at a low number. The number depends on how you best like to do this. It's up to your product owner. But personally, I feel comfortable with 100, 125 items. Anything beyond that, I believe, is excessive, and you should reconsider how you actually move things into the product backlog. And there are many other anti-patterns that fall in that direction. So, for example, in some organizations, you may be tempted to use the product backlog as a means of politics, as a means of appeasing your stakeholders, particularly the pushy ones. Yes, we don't worry, it's in the product backlog, but of course you do not intend to work on this ever. It's just about getting the stakeholder off your back, so to speak. But this is not helpful in the sense because you will need to talk to the stakeholder anyway. You're just postponing a conversation that you need to have anyway. So oversized product backlogs are typically a bad sign, and it's the first thing I do when I'm asked to support a new team. I have a look at the product backlog. How large is it? How old are the items? Are there items in there that haven't been touched for 4 or 6 weeks or something like that? If you do a bit of forensic of this kind, you will be amazed to see, and you have a good understanding how the team was working in the past. Developers develop, period. There is this crazy idea that developers just work on turning product backlog items into product increments, which of course is not a good idea for a relatively simple reason. You want your developers to talk directly with the customers, at least those who volunteer to do that, because there always will be some who volunteer who would like to do that for a simple reason. The moment you start translating input information from stakeholders and your customers to the developers via an intermediary, for example, your product owner, there will be things lost in translation. And this is really, really problematic for a simple reason. You might be running in the wrong direction. Your developers may have contributed to the solution at a way earlier stage. Maybe they could have offered a simpler solution. So a lot of reasons why your developers should actually be an integral part of your product discovery strategy and your user research team. So I've made very good experience with my developers, those who volunteered, of course, and organize user interviews for them, or organize visits of customers with them so they can observe how the customer work in real life with their products. It's a completely different understanding once your developers actually see the product in action and understand how their work is influencing the life of the customers. So if you ask me, developers should always participate in product discovery. They're not here to write code. And by the way, I believe, for example, too, that the whole team should be practicing customer care at least once a month, maybe for an afternoon or so, to just get a close look at the problems your customers are experiencing every single day with your product. We know what to do. So this idea that the people who are funding your team, who bring the budget to the party, so to speak, have a very good understanding what they want you to do. And so you're basically relieved of the task of figuring out what is worth building because the people tell you exactly what they want to have from you. Now, the problem is that if stakeholders have an idea what they need to improve their kind of work, they're very often limited with their understanding of technology. So if you ask someone, okay, what do you need to make your life easier? They very often will come up with, I need a button here, I need a link here. And when I click the button, the following things happen, because most of the time, buttons is everything they know. So this is the reason why you also cannot ask your customers what they need to improve their work life, because they won't be probably able to actually explain this to you in a way that you understand it, or that you immediately understand what they're actually talking about. You need to observe them. You need to figure this out based on data, how they behave. But be very cautious when people tell you exactly what they want you to do to fix a problem. Most of the time, they're probably not aware that their problem could be fixed in a completely different way. And more importantly, if you do this over a longer period of time, asking your stakeholders what they need, the effect will actually compound, and the quality of your product and application will really decrease rapidly that way. Skipping Scrum in a crisis, So this approach of practicing Scrum, for example, only in fair weather situations. The moment the water gets a bit choppy, we drop everything and go back to a command and control structure. Is rather common in many organizations, unfortunately, and I never understood why. Because actually, having people who are dedicated and committed to creating a great outcome and confronting them with a challenge, with a problem, actually brings out the best in those people. And by the way, there are also those who actually know how to fix the problem in the first place. At least that is my experience. So instead of skipping Agile, Scrum, and the crisis, you should be doubling down on this for the very same reason. Because the people closest to the problem are also those who might come up with a good understanding and a good answer to actually solve the crisis, instead of telling them what they are supposed to do. Because in a complex environment, this very often does not work, or might represent a less fortunate idea. So do not skip Agile, Scrum just because you're in a crisis. Project management in disguise. You can easily turn Scrum into a very effective waterfall to zero system. Just strip the product owner of all the responsibilities, particularly regarding the composition and ordering of the product backlog, and turn them into someone who is collecting requirements from the stakeholders and then feeds those requirements to the team. This works perfect. And if you have a look at how some organizations and people are practicing Scrum, you may think, okay, this is quite common. So it starts with, for example, excessive planning. We already had the case of the oversized product backlog. I was working on projects where they considered to be on the safe side by just planning 6-9 months ahead. And of course, you ask yourself, okay, why are you practicing Scrum if you know exactly what you have to do 9 months from now? Shouldn't you then operate some sort of a more structured approach, like the classic waterfall approach? Because as we know, Scrum works in a complex environment when we are not exactly aware of how the future solution might look like. When we have to work out what might be the best solution while we are making progress, actually. If you plan everything in advance, you practically do not need Scrum, because then you know everything, provided that's the case, right? Another form of project management in disguise, large product backlog. There's another cost to this whole thing. For example, the more you plan, the more you invest in your plans, the more you get attached to your plans. Then you probably develop something like loss aversion or something down the road, which is really a problematic issue. So because now it's no longer about figuring out what is best for the customer and the organization. Now it's about how can we execute our plan, because we invested so much upfront in creating this. Maybe we already committed to deadlines or delivery dates, so challenging our forecasting capabilities. So a lot of issues here that we have. By the way, it's totally fine if you just use elements of Scrum, and augment your current way of working with those. So retrospectives are great, daily Scrums are great, because actually we do not get paid to practice Scrum. We always get paid to solve our customers' problems within the given constraints while contributing to the organization's bottom line. That's the purpose. But restrain from calling it Scrum when it's actually not Scrum. That would be appreciated by everyone. The lonely team. So you may have been in the situation, you're really engaged, you're working a lot, you create great solutions to your customers' problems, and no one cares. You really lack the feedback, the support from your stakeholders. And by stakeholders, I mean internal and external stakeholders, the latter also known as users or customers. And the problem is that, of course, this kind of feedback is mission critical to actually help the team figure out whether they are on the right path. Are we solving the right problems here? Is there a way that we can be more helpful with the time that we can invest, for example, during the next sprint? And stakeholder feedback is really, really critical. For example, it's not uncommon that the sprint review is sparsely populated, because people are more used to get an email with some sort of summary, or there are conflicting other events that have a higher priority from the perspective of the stakeholders. Maybe they do not understand what the team is doing in general. Maybe they are bored by this because they never received any form of good training and introduction to Scrum and Agile and how important closing this feedback loop is. So it's not, how shall I put it? It's not self-understood that you can expect your stakeholders to show up at your sprint reviews. Sometimes you really have to work for this. You have to sell this. You have to help them understand how important their feedback to your team is. So recall one engagement in a large organization was Europe's largest utility at the time, and we really had to market our sprint reviews. It was crazy, but we printed leaflets and we left it in the cafeteria and in the cantina, and we made little posters and we stuck them inside the lifts, and it was really fun with facility management because they were removing our stickies and we had to replace them. Yes. It was a lot of fun, but over time, people understood that we are really interested in their feedback, and that's their part of the job of being a stakeholder, to support the team. The need for control, particularly on the management side, the line managers, very obvious with retrospectives, for example. So technically, we would say, oh, well, the retrospective is a safe place for the team to talk about what's going on, and line managers probably should not participate in those. I would say they should not participate in them all the time, but from time to time, I think it's a good idea to invite, provided your team is supportive of this, to invite your line managers and stakeholders to a retrospective. You want to have their feedback. However, what you should try to avoid is allowing them into the retrospective all the time. So this need of control often comes in disguise in the sense of, okay, I cannot help you if I don't know what you're doing. But I think this is a highly problematic approach, and you should really consider carefully when to share what kind of information with other people. And you need to have a safe place as a team to talk about these issues. Which brings another issue, of course, at the forefront. If you have reporting structures within your team. So what if one of your senior developers is the superior of a junior developer? That probably will also not work in the retrospective. It's just a different flavor of the line managers participating in retrospectives. And of course, we would never voluntarily surrender the minutes of any private retrospective, team retrospective to our line managers, by all means. And yeah, of course, it's a Spartan reverence, yeah. No quality. That's another issue. So, in my experience, there is no business agility without technical excellence. Those are the two sides of the same medal. It's one thing to understand what the next big thing is. It's something completely different and separated from it to be actually able to follow up and live up to this new knowledge that you have. Because in my experience, if your technology base is in a poor condition, of a low quality, you find it very, very hard to move. So probably you will understand, okay, we need to move in that direction, but actually you can't because the ship is not willing to turn accordingly. So this is a classic problem. That's also the reason why in Scrum we put so much emphasis on the definition of done, our transparent, well understood quality standard that everyone knows and that we adhere to under all circumstances. So this is also the reason why arbitrary deadlines, for example, are so critical, because they have the potential to undermine the quality of our technology stack, which may not have a short-term impact. However, by all means, it will have a long-term impact. If you start accumulating technical debt, for example, it's not a question of if something fails, it's a question of when something fails. So from a business perspective, it is a very wise decision to adequately invest in the maintenance of your technology stack, by all means. So how can you do this? Allocate sufficient time so that you can, if you're creating software, allocate sufficient time, for example, to regularly refactor your code base and fix bugs. This is of critical importance because otherwise you sooner or later will lose this thing, will lose this race. The problem with technical debt and bugs is that they have a compounding effect. So it's getting worse by the minute, so to speak. So by all means, if you are interested in a long-term good performance, if you like to preserve your ability to quickly change course based on something that you learned, invest adequately in your technical capabilities. And this also requires that you train your people in an appropriate way. So two things that you could actually think about. Autonomy. Yeah, autonomy. Supposedly Scrum teams are self-managing, at least according to the Scrum Guide. The product owner is also the single individual in control of the product backlog. That might conflict in many cases with reality, because there are other people who try to impose their opinion or on the Scrum team by, for example, creating some stage gate-like processes where new funding is allocated based on milestones that you achieve, where some sort of steering committee requires to be asked prior to releasing, etc. A lot of different ways of actually undermining the team's authority. For example, not allowing them to choose their technology, but forcing them to choose maybe a legacy technology or a less favorable technology to solve a certain issue. So it comes in a lot of different flavors. And as a Scrum team, if you want to be successful, you really need to invest in creating an environment where your organization appreciates what autonomy actually means and how autonomy of the teams is beneficial to the organization. Remember Daniel Pink, Drive, what is motivating people? Autonomy, mastery, purpose, and there's a reason why we have autonomy here. Don't tell me how to do things and when to do things. Just let me know when I have to be where, and set up the guardrails, and I will find out a way how to get there. And this is basically the basic of Scrum, and has always been. Which brings us to the last one: self-management as a lip service. So a lot of organizations pretend to practice Scrum, and actually it's not Scrum according to the Scrum Guide. It's not even Scrum according to common sense. It's more some sort of lip service, agile lip service in the sense, because they believe, okay, we need to do this, we need to say this to actually attract talent, because otherwise people won't work with us. But in fact, what they are all looking for is to get more bang for their buck, deliver features earlier, but otherwise not change too much from the previous way of working, where some part of the organization told another part what to do. Typically, this ends up in the feature factory very quickly, because self-management, the delicate checks and balances that we have in Scrum, are mission critical to actually help Scrum to live up to its potential. So if you want to have a good return on investment, embrace Scrum wholeheartedly and avoid just picking bits and pieces of it. Of course, which is fine too. Just please help yourself. But my suggestion always is give Scrum in the original sense a good try, because it'll end up to be a very profitable endeavor and a very profitable way to actually solve your customers' problems. So those were the 12 worst anti-patterns. That's my selection. Of course, we all have different selections. Eric, shall we start with the questions, or shall we?
Absolutely, and thank you.
Okay.
This was awesome. We're getting lots of good feedback in the chatter as well. Some thumbs up, some you really hit the mark, and some other cool things. So yeah, the first question we have from Timothy. It's a question about dogmatism. What do we do as Scrum Masters when the team members make suggestions in the retrospective that directly contradict the Scrum Guide or Agile principles?
That's a different. It always depends on the context. So what I stopped doing is to answer these kind of suggestions with that's not part of Scrum, because it's not helpful. I probably would start with trying to understand why they are making this kind of suggestion, and then figure out, okay, are we in a context that would actually be supportive of the suggestion? So there are certain rules that are really critical, but maybe there are some other suggestions in the Scrum Guide that we do not need to take so seriously. And maybe we can have a workaround, or we can adapt them to our context. It really depends on the situation, on the current problem that you have, on the culture of the organization. You really have to figure out, okay, is this issue that does not sound Scrum compatible? Is that your hill you want to die on, or are there more important topics on the road that you actually would like to think about? It's all give and take, and think about this. As I mentioned, we're not getting paid to practice Scrum. You know, if we manage to deliver valuable products to our customers in an ethical way, in a legal way, and a financially sane way, none of our customers will care what kind of way of working we actually use to create this awesome outcome.
Great. Thanks, Stefan. The next question, this is an interesting one because I think it starts to get into some ethical questions as well, since it could be gamed. My company uses story points for financials. The points are converted into dollars to be billed. Do you have advice on how this person can better support their team members in helping them?
Oh, I've been in that situation too. And what we did back then was to explain to the accounting people that it does not help. It may look so easy at the beginning, a story point, and then you know what the team is costing, and then you can correlate these two. But there are a lot of issues that make this a very, very tricky way of calculating things, because there's such thing as story point inflation, you know, and that might be quite tricky in the long run. So typically you see that estimations become larger over time. It also is heavily dependent on the composition of the team. So actually you would always have to take into consideration, okay, in what kind of composition did the team make this kind of estimate? And if the team is changing, it becomes harder and harder to actually compare the story points from an earlier stage of the team to a later stage of the team. So there are so many tricky points that I would really reach out to the accountants and explain the situation and ask if there's any other way that you as a team could support their needs. If they in the end say, we don't care, it's fine enough, we just need an approximation and story points will just be fine. Okay, maybe that's the way to go. You know, again, depends a bit on the context. But by all means, we reached excuse me. By all means, we reached out to the accounting people and explained the situation, and they actually said, "Yeah, it's fine. You know, an error margin of 20%, we don't care."
Yeah, I think that's a great answer, Stefan. And it's really important that finance understands, as you're suggesting, understands the impact or potential impact of using story points as a way of building
Yes.
and our billing, and the fact that, you know, it could be inflated, it could be inconsistent across teams as well, right?
Yeah.
Each team is going to estimate differently, and
Yes.
which is exactly how it should be done. So, you know, there could be ramifications there. So starting with finance and having them understand ramifications is a great thought. So next question from Les. I agree the product backlog should not be a dumping ground for all of the work. But then how do we keep work visible that is not ready to be placed in that product backlog? Where should we keep those other ideas and thoughts?
I actually have a different repository for that purpose. So what I create is basically a separate backlog for product discovery and hypotheses that are worth pursuing. So whenever we figure something out that sounds like a good hypothesis, okay, this might be valuable for reaching our product goal, and we just need to do a bit more research on this, you know, run a few experiments, build a few prototypes, etc., gather more data and feedback before we decide to move this on into the product backlog. I have a dedicated hypothesis backlog for that. So it's think of it as a collection of candidates for the product backlog, but we're not yet there. So I deliberately separate these two things from each other. because it also helps to create transparency. Your stakeholders might not be interested in working with a product backlog, but they are by all means interested in the hypothesis backlog, particularly if they contributed to these hypotheses by making suggestions. So they always want to know, okay, what about my suggestion dating back to June 26? So I would separate those.
Great. Thanks, Stefan. And yeah, I think, having that kind of hypothesis area and the opportunity for people to share ideas and share thoughts is a great way to start capturing that information. So Sarah asks, our software architects want to set up clear role plans for the whole team, workflow, which tasks go to, etc. We're in the process of really living the Scrum instead of doing that, mix and kind of they're still in that weird area of doing water Scrum fall, for example. As a product owner, Sarah's afraid that their way is kind of their model is getting lost in the ideas of self-management and so on. Do you have an idea in really arguments that Sarah could use in helping the architects understand why them deciding exactly who gets what work is not a great idea?
In my experience, running an experiment is much simpler than trying to solve the issue at an intellectual level. So reaching out to your architects and telling them, hey, this is not how Scrum works. No one tells the developers how to turn a product backlog item into an increment. It's all about self-management, checks and balances. Product owner brings what is valuable for the customers. The developers decide how to build this. This won't resonate with them because from their perspective, Scrum is undermining their position. And probably there will be concerned about their future. So what will their future position be in an environment where all the teams are self-managing? Okay, will we see descent into chaos? Will the architecture we've been building here for years be completely ruined? Will we end up in a disaster of technical debt and bugs, etc. pp. I mean, there's certainly a lot of professional concern on the one side, but also personal concern. How long do I keep my job? As an architect, if my job is no longer to tell other people who is working on what. You have to address all of these issues at the same time. So there's the professional concern about the quality of the product that they've been working on for probably a long time. And on the other side, there's this personal point that they are also interested in. The idea to tell them, yeah, we don't need software architects, go away, is certainly not going to fly. So this is problematic. Certainly, what I've tried in the past is create a better understanding by, for example, running retrospectives, run experiments. Hey, the architect, what do you think about if we run one sprint in a way that you do not believe it's feasible? Because we just have a sprint goal and then the team decides who will be working on what. It's a very small thing. And after that, you basically run a retrospective together with the architects and you analyze the outcome. And if the outcome wasn't acceptable from their perspective, try to understand why that was the case and how you can work on this. What do we need to do to actually meet your expectations? How do we need to proceed from this point on to help you maybe transition in some sort of servant leader role, where your job is to make us, the team, successful, from your perspective, and not just tell us what we need to do. And so this is a critical issue, certainly.
Thanks, Stefan. Yeah, I really often I'll dive into sports analogies in areas around this and other things too, around why do you feel that you need to control who does what, and when the people closest to the work and understand their skills and their capabilities the best, can it help influence and empower and enable those decisions, right? You don't have the person sitting up in the press box telling the coach who should round third base, for example, using a baseball analogy or a football analogy. There's lots of different things that can kind of get pulled in there. And I love the idea. Let's try it for a sprint, folks. Let's see how it works. And if we feel it's not working, let's see how we can address what's not working. I think that's great. There are a whole bunch of comments or questions in here, and I may have missed this, or there may have been a misunderstanding. But there's a bunch of questions around allowing non-Scrum team members to attend the retrospective. So there's a question of, would you recommend to allow a team lead to join the retrospective? Non-team members wanting to attend the retrospective, doesn't that break the safety of the retrospective? If others want to join, shouldn't we have a separate meeting for that and not disrupt the safety of the retro? So do you have thoughts around that? I apologize if I missed a comment that maybe was made during the session about this.
So my suggestion always is, of course, there needs to be a team retrospective. There needs to be a safe place. As a team, you need to talk about the issues that you've run into and what issues you have and how you can improve. Let's not dispute it. But from time to time, so maybe every 6 weeks, every 8 weeks, once a quarter, it's a good idea to have a retrospective with your line managers, your stakeholders, maybe everyone together. Maybe you separate, you have one meta retrospective with your team managers, for example, and you have another one with your stakeholders, because those will deliver additional input and value, particularly if it's a challenging situation. I mean, as a team, you are interested in improving the way you work with your line managers, with your stakeholders. Of course, you hope to get feedback regularly through the unofficial channels anyway. We have an official event with our stakeholders in the form of the sprint review anyway. But from time to time, in my experience, people really appreciate that you say, okay, this is a retrospective. We would like to not talk about the last sprint. We would like to talk about how we collaborate in general. How can we improve? How can we get better at this? Because it's rather uncommon for them to be invited to these kind of events, and probably they've been waiting for a long time. And the most important part of all of this is, if you spend 2 hours in a retrospective with your stakeholders, it will become very different from the usual situation where you receive some sort of requirement document from someone you don't know. Because now you can talk to Thomas from accounting, because you will spend 2 hours with Thomas. You will have a break and maybe share a coffee and a muffin with Thomas. And it creates a level of rapport that I find very, very helpful in the long run. So that's the idea behind having these meta retrospectives with stakeholders and line managers. But of course, we do not invite them to each and every retrospective. And by the way, of course, also having these meta retrospectives requires that the team members actually are willing to do this. You can't force someone to participate in the stakeholder retrospectives if they do not want to do that. This is not going to work.
Right. Thanks, Stefan. Okay, now, yeah, that separate retrospective or whatever we want to call it, as a way to engage and get feedback and the like, beyond just on the product, but really on how we're all working together. So a couple of questions here around how do you get leadership to embrace an agile way of working in Scrum? And do you have some suggested strategies that a Scrum Master can use to kind of ease some of those doubts and engage there. I know I was at a face-to-face last week in Switzerland with several of our trainers, and we were talking a lot about this, and the biggest struggles we have is the teams want to do this, and leadership, getting that leadership support, getting that leadership buy-in, and how to better improve that. Do you have some thoughts and ideas there?
I always like to look at the question from this angle of what is in for me. I mean, humans were not necessarily those who embrace change all the time. You know, we like to have small wins here and there, but otherwise we are quite comfortable with routine. You know, with a settled order. And the moment you start rocking the boat, the first thing everyone will ask themselves, okay, what is in for me? Why should I do this? In my experience, change always has some classic protagonists. There may be 5, 10%, maybe 15%, if you're lucky, of natural change agents. People who say, this is totally awesome. I want to be a part of this. Where can I sign up? You know, you really want to have those. Then there's always this small cadre of diehard refuseniks, you know, so maybe 5, 10% who say, no, you know, absolutely not. You know, this is not going to change. I will not sacrifice what I built over 20 years in this organization, my standing, my network, my benefits that I get here, because now you believe that self-organizing teams, self-managing teams is the future, you know, and you want me to become a servant leader when I exactly know what to do, when, where, and how, because I have a deep knowledge of how this operation works here. So if you want to convince this level of people, there's only, in my experience, only one way, you know, help them understand why this would be beneficial for them. And now we are talking no longer about simple change management. Now we talk about, okay, how is the system going to be affected? And this is a whole different story, because now we're really getting into the deep inside parts of the whole organization. And in my experience, change has only a chance the moment that everyone has a level of security in the sense that, okay, maybe my role will change, but I will keep my job. And the problem is that a lot of transition or transformation programs I've been a part of were sold by consultancies explicitly with pointing at, yeah, there will be redundancies, you know, because teams will be self-managing. And that is the setup that you basically lost from the start, because no one will embrace a new way of working, no matter the benefits, if they personally believe they will be a victim of all of this. So always start with what is in for me. And by the way, this brings us back to Pink, you know, autonomy, mastery, purpose. You know, this is the classic benefit that the people in the trenches have. Now try to figure out what the benefits for those at the leadership level will be of this transition. You know, think back to the software architects we had before. Same story.
Great. Thank you, Stefan. I want to be conscious of time and respect our time box and everybody's needs to get back to the rest of their day. We'll do our best to respond to any of the questions that were missed via email. This recording will be available up on the website within the next 24 hours, along with the slides and transcript. Don't forget about Stefan's new book that just released this month, Scrum Anti-Patterns, and the discount code that is available in purchasing that. It'll be in the link will be in the slides, and I put it in the chat window as well. Yeah.
So by all means, I believe it's an excellent return on investment. So we've been working. I've been working with Kurt Bittner on this, and we've discovered a lot of issues, particularly those we've been talking about and the questions behind. So what is the motivation of people to behave in a certain way? And you will be surprised what variety those can have. And I also included suggestions how to actually deal with individual anti-patterns. So what could you do about them? Not just identifying them, but overcoming them. very critical.
Yep.
Yeah.
And feel free. Don't forget, come out to the Learning Center, come out to our resource center on the website. Lots of new resources as well for your different accountabilities and keep on learning. With that, again, thank you everybody for taking the time. Stefan, thank you for taking the time today and helping folks to learn
Absolutely.
and grow. And we'll see you all next time. Thanks, everyone.
Have a great day. Bye.